Sarah Willie LeBreton, Provost and Dean of the Faculty at Swarthmore College, and I'm proud to welcome you to the second day of our 5th annual Engaged Scholarship Symposium. In my field of sociology, we commonly see community engagement and public-facing inquiries in our pedagogy and research. What is so exciting about the intellectual momentum that has been building inside and outside the Academy, and particularly over these 3 days of your presentations, are generative partnerships and dynamic, innovative, engaged scholarship across and between the academic divisions, between and among the social sciences, the humanities, in STEM, and in interdisciplinary approaches. Swarthmore College has a long-standing commitment to the principles that animate engaged scholarship, intellectual rigor combined with an active dedication to peace, equity, and social responsibility. I know that my colleagues at Swarthmore are thrilled to be presenting alongside colleagues from institutions with similar traditions and commitments. Today, for example, Brown University and the University of San Diego. In the spirit of mutuality that all of us gathered here embrace, I hope that this symposium offers you inspiration, or an opportunity to enrich others, or possibly a combination of both. Again, welcome.
Hi, folks. This is Ben Berger, Associate Professor of Political Science at Swarthmore College and Executive Director of the Lang Center for Civic and Social Responsibility. Very grateful to have everyone here today, and I want to turn things over to my colleague, Shá Duncan Smith, who will give her full title and everyone else's titles too, and take us through today's fabulous presentations.
Thank you kindly, Ben. I'm Shá Duncan Smith. I'm the Assistant Vice President and Dean of Inclusive Excellence and Community Development at Swarthmore College. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about sort of how the format will go today. So one of the things that we would like for you to do is as we move along in the presentations, for you to submit your questions via the Q&A box. And then we also wanted you to know that each panelist will have 15 minutes to present. And then it'll be followed by 5 minutes of questions and answers for each panelist or panelist group, a group of panelists. And then finally, we're going to ask that, just out of respect and just for background noises, if you wouldn't mind muting your microphones when you're not speaking. So I would like to first introduce Brown University. It's Kevin Escudero, and wanted to bring you up for your particular presentation, and I'm excited to have you here today. Thank you, Kevin. If you could give your full title and talk a little bit about your work, that would be great.
Great, thanks, Nimesh. Buenas and half a day. My name is Kevin Escudero. I'm an assistant professor of American Studies and Ethnic Studies at Brown. I'm really excited to be here with you all. Thank you, Dr. Berger. Thank you, Dean Smith. Thank you, Nimesh, for kind of putting this event together and coordinating this panel. The title of my presentation is Indigenous-Centered Approaches to Decolonization in Guam. And this is a presentation that is based on ongoing work. And so I really look forward to the discussion and Q&A afterwards. Nimesh, can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. And so I just want to start with a brief outline of the presentation for today. So I wanted to begin by talking a little bit about Guam and giving folks some context, then shifting to a discussion of the Guam Museum, which is where I've been doing most of my work this past year, talk about my positionality, briefly discuss the project I had in mind kind of pre-COVID when this was all conceived, talking about how COVID and world events shaped some unexpected challenges, but also opportunities, then discuss next steps and lessons learned, and then transition to Q&A. And this is and that was a photo of a group of activists in Guam in the summer doing one of the protests against kind of desecration of sacred sites. And So you can see kind of your hands off our lands, et cetera, kind of asserting Chamorro sovereignty and self-determination. Next slide, please. So for folks who aren't familiar, I just wanted to share a little bit about Guahan. Guahan, or what is commonly known as Guam, is an island located in the Western Pacific Ocean, due east of the Philippines. And it's the southernmost island in the Mariana Island chain. So it's part of a larger group of islands. And it's a traditional home of the indigenous Chamorro people. But it's also the home of a large number of immigrants from the Philippines and from other Pacific Island nations. And these island nations are in free association with the United States. So the citizens of these nations have the ability to enter the US without immigration visas and things like that. And it's the Federated States of Micronesia, Palau, and the Republic of the Marshall Islands, which have signed COFA agreements with the United States. And Guahan is also a US territory. And so the island has been a US territory since 1898 with the end of the Spanish-American War. And the folks in Guahan, especially the indigenous Chamorro people, have been subject to Japanese and Spanish colonization, and then American colonialism as part of the contemporary period. This map is an opportunity to just show you all a little bit of the geographic context. And so on the upper right-hand corner of the map, you'll see where the islands, the Mariana Island chain is in relationship to the Philippines, to Australia, to Japan. And then in the center, you'll see the whole chain of islands with Guam at the bottom. And then on the left, you'll see a little close-up of the island of Guam, which is one of the largest islands in the entire Marianas chain. Next slide, please. So the work that I've done and that I'm going to be talking about today is rooted in my work with the Guam Museum. And this is a photo of the museum on the upper left-hand corner. And as you'll see, the museum, it's a really impressive structure. It was designed by local architects on the island. And the top center area, showing the weaving of Chamorro traditional weaving and trying to kind of show that in the architecture. And then on the left and the right are quotes from Chamorro leaders and then from the Chamorro hymn or the Finogi Chamorro. And on the back of the museum, there are also two other quotes from Chamorro leaders talking about indigenous sovereignty, identity, culture. And the museum also is a really great space inside. And so on the bottom right, you'll see a photo of one of the exhibit halls talking about Chamorro history. And this one has language, and it's a listening station where you can listen to Manamco elders speaking in the Chamorro language and talking about language preservation and heritage. And so, yeah, I just wanted to show you a little bit of the space, the community, to give you all a sense of that. Next slide, please. So the museum is officially called the Senator Antonio M. Palomo Guam Museum and Chamorro Educational Facility, Guam Museum for short. And the mission of the museum is to, quote, foster a greater understanding of the Chamorro culture and the art, history, and natural environment of Guam. And this museum has been a long time coming. So there were plans initially in 1926 by Ramon M. Sablan. And then there are multiple iterations of the museum throughout these different periods. And most recently, in 2007, there was a Guam Museum Foundation, which was formed to advocate for the construction of a new museum. And this new museum opened on Skinner Plaza in Agatna in 2016, which you all saw the new building. So yeah, and I'd be happy to talk more about the history of the museum and the context if people want to during Q&A. Next slide, please. The permanent exhibit in the museum is I Hinanatao Nu Mananatao Tano I Chamorro Siha, or The Journey of the Chamorro People. It has 7 galleries talking about the Chamorro creation story, the history of the sea and the land, Chamorro heritage, the Spanish and American colonial periods, World War II and its aftermath, particularly for the Chamorro folks, and the renaissance of ongoing movements for sovereignty and self-determination. And the museum also has this really nice rotating exhibit space, which provides an opportunity for different topical exhibits, one on Chamorro identity, one on the Festival of Pacific Arts and Culture, or FESPAC, and then more recently, one on talking about the history of Chamorro communities during World War II, and then the impact that World War II had on the community. Next slide, please. In talking about this project, though, now that you all have a sense of Guahan and the work that the Guam Museum does, I wanted to briefly touch on my own identity and positionality in relationship to this work. So I myself am not Chamorro and I am not from Guam, but there's a photo on the upper left-hand corner, which is a photo of my parents. And so you'll see my mom and my dad. My mom is a refugee from Vietnam and came to the US in 1975. And my dad is an immigrant from Bolivia. And I grew up in Southern California. And my mom, as a refugee, was part of Operation New Life, where Vietnamese refugees were evacuated from South Vietnam prior to the end of the Vietnam War and brought to Guam and housed in Guam in refugee camps, which you'll see on the bottom right-hand corner, before later being brought to Camp Pendleton in Southern California, and then she was relocated to Western Massachusetts. And so my family's experience and connection to Guahan is through our lived experience as, descendants of immigrant and refugee communities in the United States, whose lives have also been affected by US militarism and US empire in Southeast Asia, and also European colonialism in the region. And so while I'm not Chamorro, I'm really intentional in trying to understand the relationships between our lived experiences, our communities, in trying to do this work and understanding my role, but also looking to connections and to potentials for solidarity and coalition building. Next slide, please. So when prior to COVID happening, when I first proposed this project, it was part of the Mellon ACLS Scholars in Society Fellowship Program. And this program is a great opportunity, and I definitely encourage folks to look into it, as well as the Public Fellows Program that the Mellon and ACLS have partnered up to offer. And this program offers an opportunity for faculty members to work with US cultural-based institutions, media institutions, government, policy organizations to develop mutually beneficial projects that would be helpful to both the academic work and also the mission of the cultural organization or the community organization. And so as part of that, I approached the folks at the Guam Museum, and they were interested in doing something around kind of thinking about curriculum and the role of curriculum, given my role as an academic working in an institution, and also their work bringing academic work to the public and translating it for a broader context. Next slide, please. So our curriculum project was conceived of as a project that would develop materials on decolonization for use by teachers in Guahan's K-12 public school system. And so the conversation was, a lot of times, young folks learn about decolonization and they learn about it in a context in which they're taking an ethnic studies or Chamorro studies class in college, or they're, joining an activist organization, and it happens perhaps at a point in their life where they are very much interested in getting involved, but they would have loved to learn about these topics earlier. And so we really want to collaborate with teachers in the school system to begin these conversations around what that could look like at a K-12 level. Also understanding that teachers are already doing this work and very much engaged in it, but just kind of thinking about ways to continue to support that work. And so what we thought was I would meet with teachers, I would interview them, I would learn about the ways that they're already engaging in these topics. Then I would spend some time drafting a curriculum, working with student research assistants from Brown and the University of Guam, and then work on developing a summer institute for teachers where we kind of walk through some of these modules, these lesson plans, and have some conversations around what they might want to use and what would be useful for them. Now, as we all know, COVID happened and is still happening, and particularly having a disproportionate impact on Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. And so how did this affect this project? I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the challenges that it posed, but also the opportunities that it presented. So next slide, please. So some of the challenges with the impact of the pandemic, or the onset of the pandemic at a global level, was that the museum closed. So the museum is still closed and has been closed since March 2020. So doing community engaged research while the institution is closed is difficult. as you can imagine. There were changes in the staff. So some staff members were furloughed or no longer working at the museum. And so even the people that I had started talking to, there were some changes. So what does that mean in terms of continuing those conversations with your partner? And then the Guam Department of Ed closed the public schools in the island from March 2020 through late January 2021. So the teachers I had hoped to talk with and work with in person on island were very much preoccupied with their own lives and everybody else's lives during the pandemic, but also in supporting their students while the students were doing work remotely and via Zoom. And then my own limited ability to travel to Guam. So I didn't travel to the island. I'm actually not in Guam right now, but planning to travel in April. And so this, Zoom partnership world, luckily I had been to the island and visited folks in the past, but definitely that was a challenge of maintaining connection, time differences, all of that. Next slide, please. But there are also some really great opportunities that presented themselves as part of this. And so I wanted to touch on those briefly. There was an opportunity when the executive director of Guam's Commission on Decolonization also became the president of the Department of Chamorro Affairs, which is the entity under which the museum is administered. So there was a direct connection between the Commission on Decolonization and the museum that wasn't necessarily as solid in the sense that people were working in the same offices and working with a similar staff. They were definitely in touch, but this is now a closer working relationship. And also the Commission on Decolonization had done a study tracing the historical efforts of fighting for self-governance in Guam, and they had just completed that. And so as part of our conversations, the commission came up with this idea of using that self-governance study to build that into this curriculum project. So that was a really exciting opportunity that just kind of lined up in terms of timing that I hadn't initially imagined when I conceived of the project and talked with the museum staff when we were writing the application for the fellowship. Next slide, please. There's also an opportunity, I think, as an American Studies and Ethnic Studies scholar, and coming from a discipline which always has at the root of it been very focused in community and community engagement. I've definitely wanted to learn from the museum staff and to learn from the work they're doing in engaging community members and curatorial practices and things like that. And there was an opportunity with the new restructuring of the museum to develop an exhibit on decolonization. And in doing this exhibit, I'm hoping to emphasize the importance of intergenerational approaches to discussions of decolonization, and also to talk about the role of Chamorro, but also non-Chamorro individuals in fighting for Indigenous self-determination. And so what does it mean for folks who are refugees or descendants of refugees like myself, or immigrants to Guam? What does it mean for folks who are part of the US military or are formerly part of the US military? And how do these folks come alongside Chamorro activists and communities, right? And it's also an opportunity for me to work with students in Brown's Public Humanities program, many of whom become museum curators in the future. Next slide, please. So next steps for the curriculum project, we're working with local high school and social studies teachers to develop individual lesson plans. And then the idea is that we would approach and continue conversations with Guam's Department of Ed curriculum and instruction staff to see if this is something that can be approved as part of the curriculum and the standards. And then work with some teachers during the 2021-2022 academic year to pilot the material to see how it goes, and then follow up with a summer 2022 institute or program for teachers to discuss, what was it like piloting it, what would they like to see more of, and what other folks want to kind of consider incorporating that material into the curriculum. And just a quick note that all students in Guam's high schools take Guam history, and so there is already kind of a structure in which this might be incorporated. Next slide, please. For the exhibit, one thing that I think has been on my mind a lot is how to create a narrative about decolonization, especially for myself as somebody who is not from Guam and not Chamorro, but very much interested in the topic and the issue, is how to do that in a way that brings in local expertise and scholars, and to honor their expertise. And to engage members of the community, since there's a lot of people that aren't coming to the island because tourism is, definitely lessened during the pandemic. And so how do you kind of think about a local audience? And then we have to work on creating the materials, fabricating the displays, and staging the exhibit for the opening. Next slide, please. So I just want to end with some lessons learned from this experience. I think one thing that I've learned is flexibility in terms of the schedule. So the unpredictability of the schedule, given, I think in community work, we're always flexible, but in particular with a global pandemic and a lot of other issues going on in the community. Doing everything via Zoom, I think everybody is zoomed out and we're spending so much time on computers. And so what does that mean? Sometimes we do phone calls, we message through WhatsApp, but just kind of being flexible in our modes of communication. And then being flexible in terms of developing new skills. So I think as an academic, being trained in a particular skill set, working with college students, this is really kind of productively pushed me outside of my comfort zone, working with high school students and teachers, and working with museum staff and folks in the museum. Humility and cultivating trust. I think it's been important for me to continue to center community needs and interests, and particularly above my own academic timelines or interests. So there's times where I'm like, oh, I really need to do an interview, or I really would love to just, start moving X forward or this forward. And I think it's important to remember that community needs come first, and that their timeline is a timeline I should be working on. And so it's definitely an exercise in humility and trust in terms of, my role and my positionality as somebody not from the community, but then working to build those relationships, to think about reciprocity and trust. Lastly, it's perspective. I think I've really been trying to look at this as a partnership that is long-term. So everything doesn't have to be accomplished during this year. Goals may change or shift, needs may shift or change. And with that, I'm definitely looking forward to continuing the conversation and this work after the curriculum project and the museum exhibit are done with the folks in the community as a long-term partnership. And I think that's something that I'm really excited about. Last slide. So thank you. Sius Maasi. There's my contact info and my email address if folks want to reach out. I'd love to continue the conversation. And thanks to the funders, to Brown, to Mellon, to the ACLS. And yeah, happy to answer any questions that people might have, or to any comments people have too.
Thank you so much, Kevin. We do have a question that has come in. In regards to your project's curriculum proposals, what has the feedback been from local teachers and educators at this time?
Sure. So at this point, the conversations I've had with the educators have been mostly just kind of asking them what they'd like to see more of, what materials or resources would be useful for them. And the conversations I've had have mostly been around, we'd love to have more content and more curriculum, particularly around ongoing political issues. So there's a case that was declined by the Supreme Court, the Davis v. Guam case. The Supreme Court declined to hear the case, but its implications are for who's eligible to participate in a vote in Guam around its future political status, whether it's statehood, free association, or independence. And that lawsuit was brought by somebody who's non-Chamorro, who said that his civil rights were infringed upon because he wasn't able to participate, whereas folks on island are kind of, thinking about, well, it's the indigenous Chamorro folks who have been affected by colonization, so we should be the ones, or they should be the ones kind of leading that conversation. And so things like that, like the Davis case, haven't been built into the curriculum. So teachers have really asked for, that would be a great activity, is to have a lesson plan around the Davis case, since folks are seeing it in the news and talking about it. But in terms of the actual lesson plans, they're still in process. And so the outline has been shared with some of the people and some of the teachers, and they've had some great feedback in terms of ways to engage high school students, but still to use, scholarship that is very much kind of critical theory, critical thinking scholarship. But yeah, we've had some interesting conversations around activities and ways to engage high school students from a range of perspectives, right? Whose families might be in favor of independence or statehood or staying as a territory. Yeah.
Thank you. Let's see. The other person said, thank you. Thank you. So thank you for that. And I think that we'll move on to the next panelist. I think one quick question that I had, and if you could answer briefly, is I'm really interested in what the relationship between the Guam Museum and the community was, and how you, and whatever that relationship was, how are you able to sort of maneuver that? You know, you talked a little bit about developing trust and reciprocity and different relationships with the community, but I'm always interested in institutions' relationships with the community when you're working on projects like these.
Yeah, I think that the Guam Museum has a really great reputation in the community. Dominica Tolentino, who is the former executive director of the museum, and her staff have done an amazing job of engaging community. They have a speaker series, they have movie nights, they have topical exhibits in the rotating exhibit section. They have a really nicely done main or permanent exhibition. And so I think through all those ways they've engaged, elders, young people, K-12 audiences, and folks in the schools. And so that was one of the reasons I was so excited to partner with them, is because they have this variety of programming that they do, and they're a well-known cultural institution. And so, and they also partnered with Guampedia, which is a like Wikipedia version of Guam history, where they have teachers' guides and stuff about the museum, which bring in an educational audience as well.
Thank you so much, Kevin. So we're going to move on to the next group of panelists, and we have Swarthmore College coming to present at this particular point in time. We do this till we free us, with Nina Johnson, who's in the Sociology and Anthropology Department, Rashid Ajamu and from Freedom John, and Chris Precise from Swarthmore College, class of 21. Thank you so much.
All right, so should we just jump in, or do we just go?
Yeah, you can go introduce yourself and hop on in.
Okay, great. Okay, I think I was expecting to see the three of us on the screen together, so that's why I got a little confused, but that's okay. Good morning or afternoon. I think we're in the afternoon. I'm just gonna start by introducing myself, and then I'll ask my dear family members to introduce themselves as well. So glad to see both of you this morning. But before I do that, I just want to acknowledge particularly the violence of yesterday in Atlanta, and the loss of our Asian American brothers and sisters, and how they are being targeted, and our siblings, I should say, excuse me, and how they're being targeted for violence in this moment, and just the anti-Asian hate and violence that's circulating because of xenophobia, and the ways in which we continually create an atmosphere where people's humanity can be denied, and then they can be subject to violence. And so I just want to lift that up. We grieve with our family, and we honor their lives, and we just call for an end to all of this. And as people dedicated to Black liberation, we know the way our dear foremother Fannie Lou Hamer said, we're not free till we're all free. And when we think about freedom today, we think about their lives lost. So I just wanted to start with that. I'm Nina Johnson, and I'm in the sociology department, sociology and anthropology department, in the program in Black Studies. And yeah, so I'm in 2 think tanks, and we do work collaboratively with non-incarcerated, currently incarcerated, and formerly incarcerated people. And we think about how to be in community and how to do that across all of these axes of difference, so that we can really move the needle on the issues and questions that we care about most. For that group, we're really thinking about prison abolition, but we do work on all kinds of issues because we see prison abolition as one step toward larger liberation for all people. The work we're going to talk about today has to do with that, and all kinds of other projects that we're we have worked on and will work on, and the work that we do together. So I'll say that quickly, and then I'll ask Rashid and Chris to introduce themselves as well.
Shall I go? Hi, I'm Chris. My pronouns are they, them. I'm a senior at Swarthmore College, majoring in Black Studies, and I am a Lang Opportunity Scholar, and that is how my work began and my involvement in the Philadelphia community. I'm also from Philly, so there's that connection there. And I have been thinking about how to get young students in Philadelphia more engaged with the city, to learn about the history of Philadelphia and how they can take a stand in their own communities and begin to foster care with each other.
My name is Rashid Ajamu. I go by he, they pronouns. I am a digital and community organizer. I do work with Freedom John, and I've been working with Professor Nina and Chris. Honestly, it feels like for the past year, and just getting to know the students at Swarthmore and just overall kind of educating, informing, and working collaboratively to understand what liberation is and how we can obtain it in community spaces.
All right, so I promised Rashid and Chris that I would ask us some questions to get the ball rolling on our conversation, and y'all can feel free to jump in at any point. Let this be super informal in a conversation between us all. So I'll just start with like what the plan was, and then how the plan shifted and how the plan continues to shift. So originally so the work I do is in obviously in community. Once I realized that we could do work in community professionally, I refuse to do anything alone ever again. I think it's a bad idea. We have too many gifts and talents to share. And I think we work best in community. It keeps us accountable. It keeps us nurtured. It keeps us all kinds of things we need to keep working and working well. And so I'm really grateful, one, to these two beautiful humans, and to everybody else who I have taken on and refused to let go of. And so I started these two classes thinking last year that the original class, Race and Place, A Philadelphia Story, was meant to be part of the overall research on how mass incarceration impacts the neighborhood level in Philadelphia. Philly is the rightful home of Rashid and Chris, but my adopted home. So I always align myself with the real authentic Philly heads because I want to make sure I'm accountable to Philly, which is my, again, adopted home. And so the plan was really for the course to be inside the prison, and that's usually how we teach the course. It originally was a community-based course, and we were working with Philly-based organizations, and I thought about returning it to that this fall. This was pre-COVID, and just thought we don't have enough resources for 18 to 25-year-olds who are returning home, who are formerly incarcerated, who don't have access to resources, and even those who haven't been incarcerated or adjudicated, who are in neighborhoods that have the highest arrest rates. And so originally the plan was to have half Swarthmore students in the class and half 18 to 25-year-olds who are out of school in the two neighborhoods that we do research in. So that was the plan, and we were going to do this class together, side by side, and then we were going to have it co-taught by an elder from one of the communities, community organizations of Village Arts and Humanities, to come and teach the class with us and to talk about Philly neighborhoods. So then COVID hit. So Chris was going to be in the class no matter what. And because Chris, I refused to again let Chris go. I don't even know if I just asked Chris yesterday to grade papers for me after they graduate, because I need Chris. So I thought, okay, we're gonna have to revise it because we can't have it in person. It was supposed to happen in Philadelphia. And over the summer, Katie Price, who was the originator of most of my good ideas, came to me and said, hey, you wanna do another course? And after everything that was unfolding, I thought, let's do a Black liberation course. I've been wanting to do it. I've been thinking about it. So let's do it. So we did that. I agreed to do it. We interviewed students, and all of this is unfolding. The whole world is unfolding. The pandemic is hitting Black folks harder than anybody else. And And then we see the death of Ahmaud Arbery, the death of Breonna Taylor, the death of George Floyd, that really stimulates a lot of folks, catalyzes a lot of folks to come into the streets and to demand better for the lives of Black folks. And so now I'm not a social media person at all. I'm a Luddite. I can't do it. I don't know how to do it. So I depend on the young folks yet again. And so people kept sending me to this resource and saying, check it out. This is the best information. This is the person with the best, it's on the ground. Just check it out. So this is how I found Freedom John, Rashid's incredible work, and thought, wow, who is this person who's thoughtful and funny and kind, but has good information, is the best node and connector of people to resources, who's really doing the kind of work that we want to be doing, thinking in the long term about liberation, but in the short term about how do we keep everybody alive, right? How do we free us through mutual aid and sharing our resources and doing the work that we know how to do, right, to keep us together. And so part of my work, to me, my role is to move resources from resource-rich places like Swarthmore to the people in community who have ideas and knowledge, right, and create knowledge and create culture and do all this work, but have fewer resources, right, and to really help us understand how much knowledge production happens outside of the academy, and to make these walls really porous so that we have access to that knowledge and we can learn from it, right? And we can really make sense of what's happening here, because, you know, if we really understand what the academy is, it has kept out Black knowledge, it has kept out Black scholars and thinkers. And so how do we create communities of scholars and thinkers, even across these walls, whether they're prison walls or university walls? And so Rashid and Chris have been a huge part of that for me. And so one of the things I think we've been able to focus on is really thinking about Black liberation now. Not when the walls of oppression fall and the revolution comes, but how do we live free now? How do we be free with each other? And how do we think about our liberation and community now? And we do that by lifting up each other's expertise and knowledge. We do that by taking care of each other. And so we've been really thinking about how to make this sustainable by loving on each other and caring for each other, and understanding how we can really learn from and with each other. And so I'm going to leave it there. So that's what happened. It's been extraordinary and wonderful working with these two and all of the other people who are in community with us, and just being together and talking and listening and thinking and working. And so I wanted to just open it up to see, you know, just what you've been up to, Rashid and Chris, what you've gotten out of our work together and what you think about it.
I guess I will start. So yeah, I've been with Professor Johnson since the very beginning, and I think the foundation for what we are aiming for is to begin in spaces that are nurturing, spaces where our knowledge can be shared, where we can lift each other up, where we are not afraid of learning something new. And I can wholeheartedly say that every course that I've been in with Professor Johnson has given me that space, has given my peers that space, and we have honestly fostered something that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Sometimes I'm just at a loss for words when I think about how much I've learned and how much I've grown with Professor Johnson, with my peers and my friends, my family, truly. Yeah, I don't know, Rashid, do you want to say anything?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, it is always a pleasure working with Chris and Dr. Nina Johnson. They're my icons and my idols. So I guess I started working, of course, with Professor Nina. I was brought in by another student to initially just give kind of that background on what it is that I do and why it's important. So I guess the biggest thing that I've contributed to the conversation is the whole idea of mutual aid work, right? So a lot of people are always unfamiliar around the whole idea of what mutual aid is. It sounds like something that you can pull from easily, but it still has those like weird shifts and dynamics. So some people usually relate that to charity, right? But it's very different. So, the charity model kind of tells you that there's a hierarchy of deservingness. And that's what a lot of our people, including Black people, are kind of designed and socialized to think about when, you're providing care and support to people out into the rural world. When in reality, there is no hierarchy of deservingness. Everybody is deserving of the essentials, right? Food, housing, utilities. Everybody should be able to do that. So that also functions from a very abolitionist standpoint, as Professor Nina had said earlier, where it's like, when things happen and people do bad things, okay, what's actually bad? Like, where do we create that line between, okay, this person is unhelpable and then this person can be helped? When in reality, there really is no line, right? Everybody, no matter what you've done, is deserving of those basic necessities. Um, I think kind of just understanding that the pandemic created this kind of conversation where people feel like the pandemic created a lot of these issues that are going on today. When in reality, that's also false, right? A lot of these issues that we're seeing have been going on, and they've been destructing the Black community way before the pandemic hit. It's just that the pandemic, kind of put a magnifying glass over it, and so it made things like 10 times worse, right? So what mutual aid kind of teaches and what I kind of came in to kind of help the students understand is that we all have the power to help people, and that power usually should happen around us. So it should start with the people who are around us first. A lot of people look for ways to help people and look for ways to support people and support movement work, when in reality, you should have movement work where you are. You should meet movement work where you are. So that means if there's somebody in your family who is, at risk of course, being displaced or evicted, you should start organizing with them first, right? You don't have to go out into the streets and look for organizations to join and look for your groups of people to join. You can do all of those things, right? And those are all great things. But, you know, there's a term that we use in the Black community, which is "we got us." So you need to make sure that you have everybody. And when you say have, that means supporting, loving, and caring for those around you. So when I say "we got us," that just means that we take care of us. And we know that the state and we know that the government isn't going to, because it's been proven. I mean, we've only gotten like under $4,000 in the last year. When they don't have us, we have to have us. So yeah, and that's kind of what we've been doing, kind of what we've been talking about, and just overall kind of trying to emphasize understanding that when you're a part of a college, a part of a community, it's not enough to just do on-campus things, right? You have to engage with that community. You have to be a part of that community. You have to support that community and listen to those communities, and also put your resources back into those communities, right? And yeah, so that's kind of just what we've been doing, kind of what we've been up to, and I'm excited to see where it goes from there. It's been a very amazing experience, and I'm looking forward to it.
I think that's the key to, oh, go ahead, Chris, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Rashid, you just totally took the words out of my mouth. When I intended to join LOS, I had definitely noticed the disconnect here at Swarthmore and in other academic places, and the communities there in proximity to Philadelphia, Chester. It's very voyeuristic at times, and there is rarely any effort to move resources and to engage with the people that are being studied, being placed under a microscope. So when I took up my LOS project, I intended to be with the students I wanted to teach, to take them out into the city, to engage with their community members, their families, and to learn what was really going on, what the problems were, and how we can take the resources and the knowledge to address those problems.
Absolutely. And even with like Dr. Nina said earlier, sometimes Dr. Nina was talking about the Asian, the violent incident that happened yesterday that affected our Asian siblings, right? Even with that, right? Everybody who's here, we all have friends. So it's like, why not, instead of going on Instagram and going on Twitter and going to, your professors and things like that, again, those are all great things, but those should be secondary priorities, right? You can go to your Asian friends and ask them. There are books, there is a lot of historical context to talk about what's going on in America, right? So, the concentration camps. You can look at solidarity works from people like W.E.B. Du Bois, right? He talked about, Chinese immigration, all those different, Black leaders and activists who kind of, not kind of, but absolutely opposed the Vietnam War. There's so much that people can be enriching themselves into. And it's like, sometimes it's like questions are great, right? But sometimes you have to make sure that you are using the best of all of your resources before you go out and try to do something, because sometimes it's a bit harmful and it's a bit of an overstep to kind of just keep asking people, and kind of like imposing on people when it's like so much that you can do. So a lot of the work that we've been doing comes from a place of self-enrichment and self-empowerment, but also making sure that we take those skills and we take those tools and we give them back to people after learning what we've learned, after digesting what we've digested. Because we identify, understand that everybody is not on the same level, right? And that's not a bad thing. That's actually a great thing, because you're identifying that everybody needs some kind of necessary step to get to where we are. So yeah.
I know we're approaching the end of our time. And so I just want to, thank again, Chris and Rashid. I promise I do not demand that people call me doctor or professor. They just do that because they're young and sweet. But I want to say that a lot of times we think of relationship as a means to an end, a means to get our work done, a means to produce scholarship, a means to do all of these things. And we have to think about being in community as the thing that we need to be doing. Because if we're in relationship, as Rashid is telling us, then we can begin to care for, listen to, create knowledge together, create cultural production together, whatever it is we want to do, because that relationship is what matters most. The reason we can be separated, the reason inequality persists is because we're not in relationship with each other, right? We have to be in relationship. And so I want to say that's how we work. That's the end of our work, is being in relationship, is taking care of each other, is being witness to each other's lives, is really listening to each other. And when we think about liberation, we think about liberation for all of us, so that we all can be free, that we all have what we need, that we all can be taken care of. And I know it's possible. We believe it's possible. We know it's going to happen. We know we're going to win. We know another world is possible. And we work with each other till it happens. And we care about each other and care for each other till that happens, till that day comes. And so I'm really grateful for these beautiful people who I love to pieces. And thank you all for listening. And listen, you know us now, so y'all are in community with us too. So feel free to reach out to us. You'll definitely have our information, and we can tell you more about, if you want to hear about outcomes and rubrics and assessments, we got that too. But we really wanted to just share our hearts with you today. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson. And Rashid and Chris. We are opening this up now for questions. If individuals have questions, I want to know how you would go about talking to other folk about creating these types of models, because I think this is special. This is something that's different. We hear a lot about community-based participatory research, but this is very different, right? And I want to know how you would sort of walk someone else through this model, because it's organic and authentic, right?
I think it's really just about privileging community and saying that's our goal. And like, the great thing is now I have tenure, right? So I really don't have to tell people I'm going to produce something. And I can just say, this is the work that we do, is to create community. I mean, but things come out of it, right? Like Rashid just asked another community members of ours and I to sit in on an interview. Every time I have to do something, I ask Rashid from now on to like, just come and do it, and let's think through this together. And it could end up in a writing. It could end up in a piece of research and scholarship, and that's how it happens. But it's because we share a vision for the world. It's because we share a deep care ethic and come from a place of love. And I think that's what we have to cohere around. It can't be like, I want to be the next biggest engaged scholarship superstar, right? It has to be like, I want to see our people better. And I'm such a bag of water. I feel like I cry every time, but it's because our people are really suffering. Our people behind bars are dying. our folks are separated from each other. We're putting children in cages, like we are harming Asian women in massage parlors for only because we believe that they're our enemy. We've been taught that. We are allowing people to go without food and clothing and shelter and education when we are wealthy enough to care for everybody. We live in a city that has so much empty housing that people could live in, and we have people unhoused. If the encampments last summer didn't teach us anything in Philadelphia, it is that we have enough housing to house everybody. We just have to work together to make demands on those in power who are hoarding wealth and resources to make them available to all of us. And there's nothing we can do or be that can disqualify us from having the things that we need. And if we share that ethic, there's nothing we can't do together because we're in relationship. I know what Chris needs. I know what Rashid needs, not because I've decided what people need, but because they tell me. Because we know each other. And that's, I think, how we have to work. But y'all, I'll go on and on.
I definitely would love to hear from Rashid and Chris.
I agree. I would have to say that I think that there is a very big issue. I think the number one, a lot of things this seems very cliche, but education is really key for a lot of things, right? And I don't think that we put a lot of emphasis on it, even though that's kind of what could turn a lot of this around, right? So you have the Philadelphia School District, for example, which gets funded barely pennies. So they can't afford a lot of things. So that is what? That's a pathway. That's a door. That's an open door to creating like more systems and cycles of violence, more systems and cycles of trauma, because people aren't getting what they need, so they don't understand what's going on in the world necessarily, right? They don't know how to function and navigate through those systems. So there's this idea of gatekeeping and intentional gatekeeping to keep people away from information that will help them in the long run, right? So I think that decolonizing curriculums and making sure that people understand, this is who you are, this is where you're from, this is what you can do, and making those things accessible. So the premise behind the Freedom Zone page, right, is making sure that I make information accessible and I'm not harboring information, because that in itself is harmful, right? Because I can say that I expect the world and I expect people in my community around me to understand certain things, but that's just not plausible, and everybody does not think the same. So it's important that while I'm saying things and while I'm making statements, I am also giving those resources out that I have learned these things from as well, right? Creating book clubs. Like I myself will find an illegal PDF real quick to read something. And I'll share that with people, right? Making sure that people understand things about paywalls as far as like news outlets comes, and how like the private tab browser can help you with that, just to unplug for people if you don't know. Just different ways to kind of break down those walls of gatekeeping in academia. Because while, universities are amazing spaces where people learn a lot of things, they can also be harmful because they do kind of reinforce that whole idea sometimes that you have to pay for all of this stuff. And knowledge should not be harbored. Knowledge should not be weaponized. It should be, made accessible for everybody so that everybody understands what it is that we have to do in order to create these communities of care, love, and support.
Yeah, and I think community care is something that we don't even realize that we are engaging in every day. At least for myself, I think about how my grandparents say, here's a couple dollars for you to keep you through the rest of the week. Or I say to a friend, hey, let's go get dinner together. Just engaging with the people who are directly around you first, and taking care of each other in that way will give you the first steps into stepping into, okay, so how do I take this and put it into a bigger scale? How do I redirect my resources to somewhere else? How do I do this and this and that? We seem to forget that our interpersonal relationships are the foundation for a lot of the work we do. And it's definitely something that we need to carry on with us and nurture as we continue our work.
Thank you so much, Rashid and Chris. What we're going to do is move on to the next panelist. But I wanted to thank you so much. And there's a couple questions that are coming in through the Q&A. And if you all don't mind answering those directly there, that would be great. But thank you so much. This was wonderful. So let's move on into community engagement as an anti-racist and anti-oppression framework with John Loggins from the Mulvaney Center at the University of San Diego. John?
Peace, y'all. Can y'all hear me? I'm going to assume yes. And my screen is up. Peace, y'all. My name is John Loggins. I use he, him pronouns, and I am speaking to you from unceded Kumeyaay territories in Southern California, San Diego, California, to be specific. I'm extra grateful to be here, and I'm extra thankful for that last presentation. I think those closing remarks were a wonderful segue into the conversation that I want to have with you all today. And I say conversation knowing that it's my favorite kind of conversation, one about justice, also the kind that you can't actually respond back to me. I just get to have the floor all to myself. But I promise I will definitely try to leave some spaciousness for the end so we can maybe engage in a conversation, because what I would like to do is talk to you about community engagement as an anti-racist, anti-oppression framework. And just a little bit about myself. Again, my name is John Loggins. I've been at the University of San Diego for, this is the start of my 20th year coming up. So I've been there for a minute. Prior to that, I worked at several nonprofit organizations. And prior to that, I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Kingston, Jamaica. 2 years there. And I named that specifically today because I think it's kind of where I'd like to maybe start our conversation and frame where we're going to be going from there. You know, I love my Peace Corps experience. It was, you know, definitely the saying back then was the toughest job you ever love. It meant a lot to me. I felt pulled to be a volunteer in that regard. You know, service was near and dear to me and my family. My father was in the military. And they always instilled in me this notion of community and being with community. So when I ran off and joined the Peace Corps, I had this incredible experience where I felt like I learned so much and I engaged and I gained a lot of relationships and connections that I still value to this day. I think, you know, it's been about 24 years since I've been in the Peace Corps, but that experience still is teaching me a lot. Immediately after my Peace Corps experience, I had a friend who shared with me a speech from a priest named Ivan Illich, and it was from 1968. It was an old speech. I didn't understand why they shared it with me. It was entitled, you know, "To Hell with Good Intentions," and as you see on the slide, that's kind of the subtext of what I want to talk about to you today. To Hell with Good Intentions really had complicated things for me. I had this great experience. I knew already that I did not contribute as much as I gained. And what Illich says in this piece really is basically the work that you're doing is just reinforcing dynamics that one up you and put other people down. If you're going to do anything, just send money. Don't show up here. You're wasting your time and you're doing more damage than you are doing good. And for me to actually take that and reconcile it, you know, interrogate myself, think about my experience, because it was so fresh in my mind. And, you know, if any of you all are Peace Corps volunteers and have done any kind of long-term immersive service, you know, one of the things you recognize is that when you come back, it's really hard to articulate what it is about your experience that was meaningful. Like, you know, when you talk to friends, you'll always, you know, lean into some of just the surface level things. And this piece really gave me an opportunity not just to reflect on my experience, but to really interrogate it, think about what was good, what was bad about it, and really help propel me into the work that I do now, in that, you know, how do I offer opportunities for students to really get connected with community, to fall in love with community the same way I did in Jamaica. And to me, that was very important. You know, at USD, we've been a center for over 30 years now, and we, I think, have some wonderful programs. I'm not going to speak to you about a specific program. My brilliant friend and colleague, Maria Silva, yesterday spoke about the USD Tijuana Hub and the work that they're doing there. And I think, you know, within all of our programs, we try to, you know, be democratic. We try to be reciprocal. We try to have co-creation as part of it. And I think those are very important pieces of it. But I think one of the things that this last year is shown is that, like, post-COVID, things aren't going to be the same. And I think people realize that. I think a lot of the conversations I'm in is like, we started this pre-COVID or post-COVID, even some of the presentations today, which I think is remarkable, the way we've been able to adapt and change a lot of our programs to meet that specific need. But the other big thing that happened this summer was the racial justice uprisings. And they happened in conjunction with COVID, but they were under the surface and bubbling up for a long time. And I think there should be a pre-social justice uprising and a post-social justice uprising in terms of how we operate as centers. Like, so what I want to engage with you all is a conversation about, like, how do we change the operating system? Like, you're thinking about in technical terms, like there is programs and applications that we have that we know we do, we love, they're great programs, but there's also a space where we can actually start to challenge and look at our field in general and ask ourselves, what are our intentions? Are we creating more harm than good? Are we able to actually use community engagement as an actual framework that is rooted in anti-oppression and anti-racism? And I think those things are challenges. There's things that we haven't figured out. This is work that we are currently engaged in. So I don't mean to presume that I have all the answers, but I also don't want to come into this unabashedly and say, and hedge my words. As Dr. Brown said in her last thing, how do we start to make demands of those in power? Like, how do we start to use our positionality on our campus, the work that we're doing with our students, the work that we're doing with our community, to actually say we can push an anti-racist, anti-oppression agenda forward? And I think that's something that is a conversation that we need to be having, and recognizing that it's part of service learning, it's part of community engagement, it's part of engaged scholarships. Early works. I think initially this field was an outlier. We were pushing some edges then, and I think we need to continue to push some of those edges now. I want to move on. So what are our intentions? So I'm not a big PowerPoint guy. I like to be present with folks and have conversations. But I do think that we need to be mindful and deliberate about what we say are our intentions. So I threw up a few of the definitions. The determination to act a certain way is one that I feel is important in this conversation, because I think when we're thinking about scholarship, we think about what our students learning, what we're contributing to the field of knowledge. And that's a great intention. It's a wonderful intention. Or we can think about it in terms of how do we provide service for our communities, and how do we make sure that they're feeling equitably treated and feel like they're part of the co-creation process, which I also think is a great part of the work that we do. And I think the thing with changing operating systems is that most of the programs that you have on your old operating system will still work. I think what a new operating system can do is add another layer, another texture, and add some depth to and deliberateness to our field, saying that community engagement can actually be anti-racist, and are we able to hold ourselves accountable to that if this is what we choose to actually do? And part of this work, I think, is rooted in us interrogating ourselves, being able to ask ourselves those questions. So, like, when I say be deliberate and set our intentions, I have a mentor that always says, when you say intentions, just remember you're going to be putting yourself in tension if you want to do this. And I want to put ourselves in some tension. I know we're doing that at USD, and we're doing that with some of the networks, which I'll talk about later. But, like, how do we take this work up and really challenge and interrogate the fact that, like, yes, I'm at a wonderful university, I have these great programs doing great work, and work in primarily communities of color, and but my staff is primarily all white. What does that mean? It's not a judgment statement. It's not a critique. It's something for us to explore and interrogate. I'll use USD as an example. We are actually a center with predominant, with all no white identifying members of our staff, and we work in Black and Brown communities throughout San Diego and Tijuana. But I often ask ourselves, and we ask ourselves all the time, why is it that our staff only has one person that speaks Spanish? There is some things that we need to be really mindful of, and not to, again, to judge ourselves, give ourselves some grace, but to actually wrestle with some of these things. And that may seem like a simple one, but I think when you're looking at dynamics, and you're looking at shifting a paradigm or changing the operating system, it's important for us to be very intentional and very deliberate about how we do that. These are the same things I think we ask our students to do when we send them out into the community. When we have them go out into the community, we ask them to, to build relationships, not to come in there with a savior mentality, not to look for specific things that challenge current dynamics. And for me, that happened when a colleague and friend, Tania Mitchell, in 2008 wrote this wonderful piece, Traditional versus Critical Service Learning. I'm imagining most of you are very familiar with this work, as it's, I think, a very seminal piece in our field. But some of the things that she said here really help transform our field and help us move in the direction of moving from service-oriented to justice-oriented. The key principles that she lists here: all participants seek to redistribute power in the relationship. The cultivation of authentic relationships is crucial. Participants work from a social change perspective. Those are big, big goals and directives that I think we all have taken up. Not all of us. If you're still doing traditional service, there's public service and traditional service, there's still a need for that. And there's still people who desire it. But I think that there's a point where we can choose to say that this is not the intention that we want to set with our work, is around service and solving problems, specific problems, but thinking about it in terms of larger systems dynamics. And as great as this is, I think we can be post-racial justice uprising a lot more deliberate in seeing, well, what this means. What does it mean to redistribute power in the relationship? How can we have conversations about equity and not mention the words like reparation or defund the police or decolonization? I think in this last year, and it's been, I think, the trajectory of where we've been going, is that we're building the capacity to have this language. We're building the capacity to hold these conversations in a different way. Definitely our students are, definitely young people are. And I think it's rooted in a lot of the work that we've been having them do in the community. Like, they're starting to see these relationships, they're starting to identify these systems dynamics, they're able to name those things. And as educators, as people who are creating this context, I think we have a responsibility to push that agenda forward as well. We can't sit back and say, like, well, we're doing our work. Well, let me back up a second. I oftentimes realize when I share this, I try to do this from a very heart space. I try to be present with the conversations that I want to have, but I also recognize that oftentimes it sounds like I'm directing and saying that we have to do this, and you're not doing this, you're not right. I'm not trying to say that. I'm trying to offer how I feel about this, because I feel like we're at a moment that, as a Black man, as a person of color, who is tired and fed up of the way things have been, really see an opportunity and a need and an imperative for us to move in this direction. So I'll name that for myself. I know that that's not where everyone's operating from, but I will say that there is a space for us to, again, have this conversation and see how we can move this forward. The cultivation of authentic relationships is crucial, and participants work from a social change perspective. And I think all those things are self-explanatory. And of all the programs I've heard from yesterday to today, I think all the programs do this. I do. I feel like, our intention is to do this. We are working very hard to create these programs, but at the same time, I know for USD, when we go out into the community, we frame it in terms of, this is our Catholic identity. Our values are compassionate service. We're doing this from a sense of duty and righteousness in a way. But not acknowledging the fact that, we have a building named after Father Hunapedasera, who the indigenous community in San Diego really dislike, really oppose the naming of this building because of the atrocities committed during colonialism, and that means something too. I think, how we show up and how we are intentionally showing up and how we bring ourselves to the space is an important consideration. Apologies for that. And knowing that students are in a place where they're able to see those dynamics, able to look at the police department and see how it's connected to oppression and institutional racism, and being able to name it, looking at the prison industrial complex, being able to name it, looking at healthcare and being able to see and then distinguish how racism is embedded in all those things. It's not embedded in education. I think we all can realize that, but I also think there's going to be a point, a precipice moment where students start to turn their gaze on our institutions. And I think our willingness and our ability to be leading that as opposed to reacting to it and is going to be an essential piece of how universities and our centers are able to respond effectively in a way that says, this is work that we want to put forward. This is work that we're behind, and not just with a Black Lives Matter statement, not just with an announcement that we are supporting these movements, because I feel like every campus, every organization, every business have those things. And was there an intention around there? What did you do? Where's the accountability? And how do we start to ask ourselves that questions and our universities that questions as well? So I feel like I've been going on for a minute. Let me catch my breath. These are always the moments where I would like to say, you're not wrecking my flow, ask me questions. I imagine some of them are coming up, but I can't see them quite yet. And I'm gonna also say, we're not the only ones doing this work. I feel like this is a conversation that if you wanna be a part of, you can be a part of. Again, we don't have the answers, but we have networks like the Place-Based Justice Network. I saw a couple of members in the participants here, which is an organization committed to transforming higher education and our communities by deconstructing systems of oppression through place-based community engagement. Doesn't get more clear than that. We're going to do this, but how do we do that? How do we start to push that work forward? And I think a lot of the work that we're doing is not just challenging our systems, but challenging our own centers and the dynamics that we're working with. You'll see in that picture there's a Next Generation Fellowship there that the network started, which is working with young professionals of color in the field of community engagement and engaged scholarship to figure out how do we tap into that wisdom? How do we see the value in what they offer and acknowledge the fact that it's hard to keep people of color in this field. Like the fact that I've been here 20 years, I think I'm an anomaly. There aren't too many of us here, even within the fellowship that's geared to trying to keep these young professionals in the field. They oftentimes move to other organizations doing justice work that they feel is more deliberate and more engaging and more directive and less unequal in the power dynamics. And I feel those things are very important considerations. So that's advancing the conversations. There's a wonderful Anchor Learning Network, Coalition of Urban and Metropolitan Universities. My colleagues, Maria and Chris, work very closely with this. And, I don't want to go off and name all the things that we're trying to do to push our university, push our centers, to really acknowledge our role in the community, and not just the role that we have all these resources, but the role that we've had politically and historically over the years. And those things need to be considered when you're actually having a genuine conversation about equity and social change. You can't not acknowledge your own role in that. And I think more often than not, we disregard it or we turn a blind eye to it. The other one is the Higher Education Reparation Engagement, which is USD is newly a part of. It's a conversations about how higher educations can start to look at reparations. I know some of you may have seen just on Monday, the Jesuits are committed to raising $100 million in reparations to the slaves that they had owned. They're pushing that conversation forward. It's a conversation that I think is very, very hard and fraught. You try to bring it up on your campus, it's going to get a lot of pushback. But again, how do we make demands of those in power? Because there's always going to be a power dynamic. If you want to break it down to its core, I think when you're looking at community engagement and looking at our roles in the university, the power that we have is that university holds the keys to what is considered wisdom. Like, we can confer letters, we can establish where that wisdom is, and we can start to value it. So it's wonderful to hear how people are paying their partners and how they're offering stipends. All of those things I think are very connected. And again, this is not to say that we're not doing this work, but how is it that we can become more full-throated in our opportunities and our and take advantage of the moments where we can start to stress the importance of this, because I think people's livelihoods and lives depend on it. On our campus, so specifically on our campus, I did want to share, not necessarily this statement, but just as an example, these statements came out in abundance post George Floyd, post Breonna Taylor, during that Black Lives Matter movement and during the racial justice uprising, and how are we holding ourselves accountable to those things? This is our statement from our center, and we've been working very diligently to make sure that we're holding ourselves accountable. And that includes, revamping and looking at our civic engagement policies that we've created. We've gone back through there and looked at the policy and said, like, how do we more intentionally make this anti-racist? How do we sunset some programs that aren't doing this work as an anti-racist, so we can invest more of our time in creating programs that are? How do we change our faculty development workshops to when we have them engaged in the community, they're more equipped and able to have these conversations and do this work as well? I think it's rooted in how we're choosing to operate as a center, and realizing that we are getting pushback from it. We are not moving at the pace I'd like to be moving at with it, but I do think it's an important conversation to be had, and one that I'm happy to have with more people. And again, I'll invite you to reach out to me directly, invite you to talk with the Place-Based Justice Network, invite you to ask some questions, but I'll leave it there. I don't think I provided as much spaciousness as I wanted to for the quick Q&A, but I'll stop there and open it up to questions.
Thank you, John. Yes, we have one question. So as a Jamaican American who was invited to serve with the U.S. Peace Corps in Mongolian before COVID switched up those plans, do you have any advice for people who might not fit the average American volunteer narrative? For example, those of us from racial and ethnic minority backgrounds, low income backgrounds, or gender and sexual minorities. Thank you.
That's a great question. I think bringing our full identities to the space is an important variable. I think one of the key motivations for Peace Corps is cultural exchange, and to think about this cultural exchange existing for as long as it has, with very little representation from people of color, means something. And I would also say it's challenging, to be in a place and not look like what people's expectations of you are in the Peace Corps or in any kind of long-term service, because I think there is people's projections on what is. Even going to Jamaica, a predominantly Black country, and being a Black American in that space was odd. People wouldn't believe that I was necessarily a Peace Corps volunteer all the time, which was extremely useful and helpful in terms of my ability to connect and engage with the community, but it brought a different sensibility. It helped me lean into my identity a little bit more. That's why I love the experience so much. It was not me, I was a successful student, and I think Peace Corps helped me realize when I was pretending to be white. When do I do these things, and when do I take on this persona? When do I code switch? And Peace Corps and those experiences, like all the community engagement, all the same things that we tell our students when we send them out into the community, is applicable to you as you start to take up that work.
Thank you so much. So we're going to transition into the next panel. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you all.
And if there's additional questions that want to come in, you can go ahead and put it in the Q&A, and we will answer them accordingly. So next, last but not least, is the Transformative Justice Initiative at Swarthmore. ethical higher education collaborations with returning citizens. We have Professor Ben Berger in the Lang Center from Swarthmore College, Professor Yvonne Chirot in the Department of Religion at Swarthmore College, Professor Marjorie Murphy in Department of History at Swarthmore College, Alicia Liu, class of 24 of Swarthmore College, Philip Wu, class of 24 from Swarthmore College, Ibrahim Sulamini, the Executive Director for Transformative Justice Initiative, Anton Hinshaw, the Director for Transformative Justice Initiative, Lawrence Sabir Bell from the Transformative Justice Initiative, and Hanif Parker from the Transformative Justice Initiative. We're looking forward to hearing from you all. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Shay. I'm Ben Berger at Swarthmore College. I would go right to the TJI guys because it's really all about them. I just want to say also to recognize a different community partner of ours, and that is the Inside Out Prison Exchange Pedagogy Program run out of Temple University, because all of what you're going to hear about, which is a fabulous program, was really inspired by a lot of our training with Inside Out. Nina Johnson is trained with them. I am, Keith Reeves, Mark Wallace, many Swarthmore professors. So we couldn't do work with them during the pandemic, obviously. We turned to our fabulous partner, the scholars at the Transformative Justice Initiative. And I want to turn it over then to Ibrahim Soleimani, who is the Executive Director of TJI.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ibrahim Soleimani, Executive Director of Transformative Justice Initiative. I'm coming to you from the campus of Rutgers Camden. As the Director of Transformative Justice Initiative, I guess I could say a little bit about myself. I'm a juvenile lifer. I did 30 years in prison, incarcerated at 15 years old, and came home at 45. May 24th, 2018. I'm also the Vice Chair of the Prisoner Survivors Union, the credible messenger and undergrad at Rutgers Camden, and again, the Director of Transformative Justice Initiative. Transformative Justice Initiative is a nonprofit organization and is born out of a neglect for those incarcerated, and we directly address the needs of those incarcerated, not for them, but with them. We address alongside the issues and presenting the issues to the public. Members of TJI consist of formerly incarcerated undergrad and grad students. We use our carceral experiences to educate the public, and we use our experience as those who return to society to enlighten those still incarcerated, how to navigate the system once they're released from prison. One of our biggest objectives is to push transformation of the legal system, and we oppose reform because reform just what they do is in the name is reform. They reshape the system, and it becomes a continuum of as it has always existed. So we go from slavery to the reform of Jim Crow. And I guess I'll turn it over to Tone Henshaw, the director.
Hello, I'm Tone Henshaw, Anton. I'm also a juvenile lifer. I did a considerable amount of time. I'd served 100% of a 30-year to life sentence. We were literally thrown away. And inside, I met some great professors that came in and began to help us educate and use the light of education as a tool of transformation. And using that as a tool of transformation, we've kept that going on for the last, I want to say about 28 years to get to this point. And when I came home in 2018, I met Dr. Berger at Princeton University, Professor Johnson at Princeton University, and was watching the wonderful work that Swarthmore was going on and things like that with the Inside Out model, and being able to talk about what we needed to do and how to navigate the system in New Jersey going in and out. And then the pandemic hit when we came home. And when it hit, we were like, wait a minute, this is an opportunity to build on this relationship. And everything was Zoom. And to make the course information interested, we said, well, listen, how about partnering and let us show you how we learn inside and how we use our experience to bring alive the curriculum, because we didn't have the technology that's out here. So, and allow us to now with the side-by-side model that we created, but it was born out of the inside-out model. It was a continuation of that. So the most important thing was continuing the inside-out model and then building on it. Now, what do we do when we come home? So we partnered and we began to, with Professor Chabot, Marjorie, we started just as a pilot program. Is this even possible? And we began to lend our academic experiences with the students at Swarthmore and other universities via Zoom. And in being able to do that, we expanded to the next level this semester and saying like, yo, we can build this out into something else. But it was born of, like Ibrahim Suleimani said, something that was missing. And we were able to help and assist Swarthmore in this partnership that was formed at Princeton, teaching about the inside out model, to now progress to this side-by-side model, to get to the point where now we're saying, yo, we can keep going and we can keep sharing, because this is something that, one, allows us to be in service of our community, and our community and our education institutions to be in service of us. And what does it do? I'm not about recidivism. This is about desistance. And you guys and what you've been able to do and partner with us has given us the position to say, nah, crime is not an option anymore. We must continue to build this relationship and build it out. And then the beautiful thing was, when we weren't looking for it, but then we were properly compensated for our efforts and our time and our energy and our collaboration and consulting. And it got to the point where we're like, yo, we're doing some great things that we never thought possible, just by expanding a model that was already in place and making it fit in the pandemic to help everybody. And for that, Lawrence Bell.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Lawrence Bell, and I'm a member of TJI and a Rutgers graduate. And kind of what I want to talk about is the fact that, you know, my TJI colleagues and myself, we're all products of the New Jersey STEP program, which is the New Jersey Scholarship for Transformative Education in Prison program, which is the program that accredited us and got us enrolled in Rutgers, and we were able to graduate from that. But the biggest thing about it is that the overarching ethos of New Jersey STEP wasn't just to provide an education. It was to provide care for the whole person, not just the brain. And that's kind of the model that we have brought into this side-by-side program. So when we enter into these spaces with these young scholars, we're not just concerned with helping them digest the material or understand some of these deeper philosophies. We're interested in building community with them and making them understand that we are not just an academic resource for you, we are a resource for you in general. And the reason that we do this is because it helps to reshape the narrative of what people in prison are doing and what they're coming home from doing. On the inside, we used to have a saying that we're not trying to make smarter criminals, we're trying to make better people. And we've kind of co-opted that now to say, we're not just trying to shape better students, we're shaping our future leaders. And with that, I would like to introduce our Swarthmore video produced by one of our excellent and fabulous Swarthmore students. Ben?
Coming up.
My name is Hanif Parker.
My name is Lawrence Bell.
My name is Ibrahim Suleimani.
My name is Anton Henshaw.
And I'm with the New Jersey Transformative Justice Initiative.
And I am a member of the Transformative Justice Initiative.
I'm the director of Transformative Justice Initiative.
And I am the executive director of Transformative Justice Initiative. Transformative Justice Initiative is an advocacy group not for, but with those incarcerated.
It was started as a group of consulting formerly impacted people to be able to share our lived and shared experiences with legislators, the community, and universities about the things that happen while in incarcerated spaces.
We operate from a space of lived experiences to set right neglected matters centering around those who are incarcerated.
We're all carceral scholars at one time. Now we're out here, and we worked in 2020 with 2 classes with Swarthmore College as course assistants.
In Yoruba culture, and I will give you a background on what divination is, but in Yoruba, the course is called African American Religions. It is a course that, as a historian of religions, I wanted to teach a course that would provide the history and background of the varieties of religious experiences and traditions of African American people. These New Jersey scholar students were really generous in that as teachers. These students really balanced being students and being teachers and sharing their experiences. We had different insights and different points of views and different methodologies that these students are bringing to bear in looking at historical documents. It forced all of us to think about learning in a different way.
Does anybody have any thoughts on the first question about what happens when the sacred becomes secular? So in the class, I think I can kind of consider myself like a co-student or a collaborative learner with the rest of the students, because I kind of gained as much from them as I hope that they gained from me. And the thing that I would say that I contributed is my lived experience of having went through 30 years of the carceral space. But also I think it's because we tend to be a little bit older than the average students. I think there's a different maturity level of understanding. My interest in participating in this is kind of stemmed in the idea of helping to shape and inform our future leaders, you know, and understanding that some of the young adults that we encounter now are going to be the people that make the decisions in our future. We need to really make sure they understand the truth and the reality of what's going on, as opposed to just continuing the stereotype that exists or as it exists.
It was about bringing to light the organic intellectuals that were created in the carceral spaces and being able to share those talents with the world, and with especially the universities and colleges, wherever we find them.
Too long, traditional academia has tried to write about problems, about people out there. Really, we ought to be talking about problems with others, not writing about them, but with them. And that's what we've been able to do here, to co-create knowledge. These scholars we've been working with, they help us to do a better job of privately engaged scholarship and publicly engaged scholarship. Their life experience and the way they filter text through life experience, and also the life experience is helping us to understand the problems that need to be addressed.
One of the wonderful things I think that I got from engaged learning and these community-based classrooms is that everyone becomes a teacher and a learner. And that to me is a different kind of pedagogy. So I couldn't have anticipated that when I started. It was tremendous for me to take part in that. And I would really love to do this again in the future.
I think opportunities like this should be plentiful. Where else could we have this conversation but in a class like Swarthmore? So when opportunities like this are given to people who are formerly incarcerated, the narrative gets to shift again, right? The narrative gets to shift about what conversations are had between people who are formerly incarcerated and people who have sought a traditional academic way.
What we really want to do is open the eyes of lots of other colleges and universities as to what a great resource this is. Swarthmore College and the Lang Center for Civic and Social Responsibility are very happy to put others in touch with and to extend our collaboration with the Transformative Justice Initiative to work with other institutions as well, and to share the kind of getting up to speed knowledge that we've achieved already with others so they can do their own collaborations with the scholars.
Terrific. Marge Murphy, Professor of History, you want to jump in because you also taught a class with this group. You're muted there, Marge.
I keep pushing the button. Am I on? Okay. Hi, everybody. Hi, Philip. Hi, Alicia. Hi, Yvonne. And congratulations to Nina. Oh my goodness. I remember when you first came. So I'm an old lady and I had one more class to teach, and we were in the middle of a pandemic, and we had 1,000 rules for everything. And I'd always wanted to do an inside out course, but we never could get it arranged. I tried with Keith in the spring semester with Keith Reeves, and in the middle of it, the pandemic came along. And so I started as a freshman seminar, and I wanted my students to have a Swarthmore experience, a college experience, because they never had one. But the other half of the class wasn't there until Ben Berger called up and said, hey, I got these transformative justice people. And once they came in, the dynamic of the class, I think you guys agree, changed. We were all happier. And I found Hanif, who's from Jersey City. So that made me happy. And I've always looked at learning as simply having someone open a door for you. So I spend a lot of time opening doors. You choose to walk through the door or not, but I want to keep opening doors. But I'm done. I'm too old. I'm an old lady. I gotta say, I went to my last demonstration, the George Floyd March in the city, and I realized that I didn't think I could outrun a cop. And I think that's when your marching days are over. So it was a lovely thing to do. Thank you, Ben, for putting it all together.
Alicia.
Okay, hi. So my name is Alicia. I'm the class of 2024 at Swarthmore, and I'll try my hardest not to sound trite, but it was really a life-changing experience for me. If something is properly eye-opening, it should be heart-wrenching and mind-boggling at the same time, because it's a reality that is so completely different than what you expect. And it really humanized such a group of people that's so stigmatized. And I thought that was a beautiful thing, to be able to look at people in a more human way. And they had this marvelous and fantastic wisdom that I don't think I could have experienced elsewhere. I'm so grateful for this class. It was probably one of the best classes I've ever taken. I don't have that much experience in college, but like I think hands down, it was something that I definitely do again, and something I recommend fully with no reservations at all. And I hope you can tell my enthusiasm. I actually got to interview Sabir for Lawrence, Mr. Bell, for my paper, and like that just brought a whole new perspective to like what I was writing, that it was affecting people's lives, and it brings scholarship away from the ivory tower to the good earth, and you can experience that life, although difficult, can be really beautiful and enriching for many people just through these experiences. So thank you.
Wow, okay. Alicia's just gonna upstage me like that. All right. I'm Philip. I'm also class of 24, and I took Professor Murphy's class in the fall. And I think the biggest benefit of having these folks from TJI in class was that I'm talking about the students, had access to these really intelligent and thoughtful people who had lived experience of being in a prison. Speaking with them gave us this window into how prisons function, in a way that goes sort of beyond those abstract descriptions that you read about in, say, Foucault, where he talks about technologies of power and the panopticon. That's all out there. I didn't really get what it meant. From our bubble, on campus, that doesn't seem very concrete. When you speak to Anton or Ibrahim or any of the others, Hanif, that sort of, those ideas become much realer and you get a better understanding because they've been there and they've survived the abuses of prison.
Hello, my name is Hanif Parker, and these spaces, I like to think of them as intellectual marketplaces. They provide a platform to reshape what popular culture thinks about somebody who's a returning citizen or formerly incarcerated. And one of the highlights came when Ruben was making the video that was just presented to you. And we were waiting for everybody else to join in. And I asked Ruben what was his major, and he quipped philosophy. And I asked him what was his favorite philosopher. So he went to go on to say Heidegger. And I was like, the father of existentialism. He was like, nah, I think you're thinking more of Sartre. I was like, well, Ruben, Europeans usually hail Heidegger as the father of existentialism. And he was looking at me like, I'm like, yeah, I like Heidegger's interpretation of, Kant's idealism and how he rejects it for a more critical realism. And he's looking at me like, you read Heidegger? I'm like, yeah, he talks about that in Being in Time. Right then and there, it was something going on that's very organic, right? And he asked me what was my favorite philosopher, of course, and I told him, I kind of wavers, but it made me raise a point. And the point was, Antonio Gramsci talks about intellectuals. What we think of an intellectual. This platform changed, and it continues to change what we think of a person re-entering society. Most people would say, how was prison? How was your experience in prison? Me and him are talking about European philosophy. This platform should be, I'm very passionate about education, and that exchange between me and Ruben was just like, it was effortless. And I know he will never have the same perception of somebody who's formerly incarcerated.
For just to like contextualize all of this is that I love my brothers, right? I did a lot of time with them, right? So, and then this, what we're doing, give hope to the brothers and sisters that are coming behind us, because they want to understand how in just 2 years did we get here with Swarthmore. These are the things we talked about. These are the things that we strategized about. If we could just create opportunities. And what we've been able to do with Swarthmore, TJI, Princeton, Fairleigh Dickinson, Rutgers, all these other institutions of higher learning has been remarkable. And what it's doing is it's creating an environment where we're publicly going to be healthy. This education is an instrument of public health, and we have to get in that space. It will transform and restore anything if done properly, with the proper relationships and the proper communication. And that's what we're building. And I love that we're here in this space, because a lot of people doubted that we could do it. And we didn't care. All we said was, we're going to keep working. And we promise you, let's keep working together, and we're going to keep transforming and restoring lives and community. And more importantly, we're going to build public health curriculums that are going to change anything we ever thought or imagined. And then we'll be able to help put a dent into the structural violence wherever we find it.
It's beautiful, Tone. Thank you. And I would let those be our closing words, except I've got to say one last thing, which is that I want to echo what many others have said. This is why this symposium has been so fabulous. We heard Jason say it yesterday, heard it echoed by Nina, Rashid, by John, by Chris, by the spirit of mutuality, the spirit of being able to do things together, but also of compensation. That we're here anyway. Those of us who work at the college university, we're compensated for our time. And the importance of non-extractive, non-exploitive work that actually is co-created. We were able to do that with TJI. I encourage others to either make a program like this in their own state or work with TGI more regionally, but work with your general counsel office, work with whoever does contracts, come up with an agreement that is that recognizes the work for the sake of clarity, for mutuality. And this is just the beginning. So we welcome a conversation with others afterwards. Thanks so much to all involved with this. Shay, I want to turn it back over to you, and I thank everyone for being here today.
No, thank you. I mean, right now I think that was a perfect way to close out. I want to thank you all for lifting up your work in this way and ways to collaborate and engage with the community, and just these new models of doing that organically, again, authentically, you know, where a long time ago, when I was doing a lot of work around community-based participatory research, I remember a faculty member just saying that at any, when we do this work, it's always the institutions or the college that derive the greatest benefit, no matter what, you know, what work is being done. That's you know, what happens. And that doesn't feel good, right? You know, that's not sort of what we are out in the community collaborating, trying to do, right? Many of us that are on this call or that are in this Zoom right now, you know, come from these communities. These are our communities. And if not, there's something very similar to the ones that that we, you know, have grown up in. So just to hear this, just to see you all lift this up and talk about how you're engaging and collaborating with the community in this way is a beautiful thing. And you know, I look forward to talking more about this and thinking about ways to promote this a bit more in the future. So thank you so much to the Lang Center for having this Engaged a Scholarship Symposium. Thank you so much for to Brown University, to San Diego State, to the Transformative Justice Initiative, to the collaborations with Freedom John and with Dr. Johnson and her course. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everyone. And I hope you all will be able to stay on afterwards to be able to connect. But this ends the formal part of our webinar today. So
University of San Diego. So next year it'll be San Diego State. Right?
Oh yeah, sorry, University of San Diego. To me, well, you can get me back and say, you know, I graduated from Michigan State. That's sort of like the same insult. Go Blue. Shameless plug. Thank you. Did anybody else want to lift up anything before we go? Thank you.
If you don't mind, I just want to, sorry to interrupt you, Shay, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Okay. I just want to quickly say, I had a chance to say thank you to Katie Price, but I also wanted to say thank you to Jennifer and to Dolores in the Lang Center, who've just done incredible work to support us. And I really wanted to lift up Ben Berger really quickly, just to say it has been incredible working with someone with the kind of ethics and commitment that we need. Leadership really matters in this work and like what people support us doing. And so I just want to thank Ben for just his real commitment to having integrity and an ethic of care and mutuality, and really just honoring the people that are outside of the college, that it doesn't always come with the work. And so I just really want to lift that up and say thank you to Ben Berger for just leading us and supporting everything we do. It really just means the world.
And I have to add on before I sign off, I'm actually getting ready to talk about community in a second in a workshop. I want to lift up Nimesh. Thank you so much for your coordination and for bringing folk together. I mean, just hands down, I'm sure a lot of people want to thank you, but I just wanted to lift up your hard work in all of this. Thank you. Okay, we can start recording now if you'd like.